Give me a second here.
While he's getting the first slide ready, I'll just take a minute. I am going to be making the comments for the altered reality section. My name is Jeff Berg. I'm a reportage and fine arts photographer from the Minneapolis area, and I've been doing photography for 55 years or so. So done a few things,
Uh,
and
okay, I think,
although,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Steve. No, you go ahead, Steve.
Okay, first we'll start with the sevens.
Oh, okay. Sevens. I don't know what sevens means in this. Oh, score.
Oh,
Got
okay,
it. Got it. Now I
yes.
understand where we're at. Yes. So Ghost Town. We like the composition here overall. It's a very comfortable subject. A good use of the contrast in the monochrome. Um, my question here is regarding what does the filter and the effects chosen, the altered reality, do to enhance the story here? Um, and there's also kind of a question as to what is the subject? Are we supposed to be looking at the trees or are we supposed to be looking at the cabin? The cabin is very dark relative to the very light trees, and because of the treatment, all of the texture in the cabin has been really, really super softened. Meanwhile, you've got all of those hot spots, all of that bright light in the grass and in the trees behind the cabin. Next picture, please. This one, bold subject with a very interesting approach. I'll have to say that as much as I try not to see them before I sit down to judge, I caught this one caught my eye, and I said, "Oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to accept that as the sound of silence." So I was glad it was in altered reality, because to me it's a very, very loud composition, and I could see this as a poster. The repeating patterns and repeating lines are good. What we do see here is some confusion. We don't really have a place for the eye to land. Some of the lines are conflicting. There was some dispute about whether the purple tone in the left-hand corner works or not. Artist choice, but it was a case of conversation amongst the judges. And then the subject horns were a little bit too dark relative to the background. They kind of go away, whereas the background they're really only visible against the likeness of the background. Next picture, please. Good catch and nice composition. The alignment here is good. What we're wondering here is, does the altered reality portion of this really advance the story here? Are these birds sharp in the original? In which case, what purpose is served by softening them? And the fact that the eyes are just non-existent again in that dark beak area, unfortunately, counts against this photograph. There was also a suggestion that maybe a slightly wider eye angle. I'm sorry, wrong image. Next image, please. This one, we've loved the simple composition, three different poses working well together. The black background allows the subject to pop. This was an effective use of the AR process. If we're going to start to get nitpicky, we would ask the maker to take a look at the color difference in the stems. And, if it works for you, great. But it is something we noticed. And there we could use a bit more delineation between the twisted stalks on the two plants on the left. Nice job.
On to black and whites.
Yeah, let me just get this up here. We liked the sharpness and the textures here. Good separation and contrast between the background and the subject. We found the highlights maybe to be just a little bit too hot, and the exposure and contrast maybe just a little bit too bland. We could add a little bit more depth to this image, get a little bit more of the true black. And while we always say you want true blacks and true whites, the real hot whites in this image need to tone it down because they're just blowing out highlights. They're not really, really helping with the image. Then the other question kind of becomes just one of story. It's a nice portrait of a gorilla. It's the type of picture that one often sees. Next picture, please. This one, well seen and exposed. We liked the sky. And both judges marveled at what a wonderful privilege it would have been to be standing there next to the photographer while that was being made. It's just a great place. You can tell that from the picture. Um, there is to my eye, a real disconnect between the coolness in the rocks and the warmth in the sky, and the fact that it's very cool on the left and very warm on the right. It's just a very, very clear delineation in that picture. Um, the rock in the lower right-hand corner, we're not sure that that really adds much to the composition. And the fact that the horizon is kind of a 50-50 split. I would make a choice one way or another. On this particular image, if it were mine, I would probably go for the reality and reduce a little bit of the reflection, which in turn would get rid of that problematic rock. Next picture, please. Where are we at? Very graphic composition. Another lovely moment. Good use of panorama here and of the contrast to separate the elements. The boat is a little small and it's dead center. A dead center means you want me to focus there. And I go there and I've got a tiny little boat with some very, very potentially interesting graphics on the sail that I can't quite make out. It's just a little bit lost. It might help if it was a little further away from that big centralized rock in the background, but basically it's really just too small. There's also the fact that the water itself it's got a very grainy texture. It's not a comfortable feeling when we're looking at water. Again, sometimes I will make crop suggestions, and I will tell you that as a photographer and maker myself, I'm very sensitive to people criticizing my crops. So I always want to curb this with, if it were mine, I would consider making an even deeper panorama or a wider panorama. Take some of the sky and some of the water out. Make it really, really out of proportion. Um, nice picture. I would have made it. Next, please. Steve, I'm still seeing the same picture.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I
Okay, no problem.
kind of,
Take your time, sir. Here we
did
go.
that advance the picture?
That's advanced the picture.
Okay.
So this is another one that's very, very graphic in its nature with the sharp contrast. A good use of the silhouetted people and the numbers around the clock. Um, Good silhouette and sharp focus. What we wanted to see after we really started to dig into this image was trying to bring out some of the middle grays in the floor and around the clock face while still maintaining that silhouette with the people, just to give the picture a little bit more variation and depth. The buildings that are visible through the center of the clock face and the lower portion, they either need to be brought out or they need to be eliminated entirely. They're just existing in that sort of ghostly existence that catches the eye, but once the eye is caught, they don't really deliver. It's just the vaguest hint of them there. Um, so one possibility would just be to brighten the entire center portion of the clock face. Now, we're not looking for that outer ring of the clock, but the center portion of the clock face, just brighten that up, increase the contrast with the hands, and make those buildings go bye-bye. Personally, I found the square beams to be distracting and would suggest a lower angle or moving in a little bit, which would also eliminate some of the people and might tighten up the shot. My opinion was not universal amongst the judges in the discussion, but something for the maker to think about. And next, please.
Believe it or not, I'm working on it. Oops. There we go. 8.
Okay. Um, all of the elements are here for this to be a spectacular picture. The boat is nicely placed, nice wake, exists nicely within that darker reflection so that you can see it's there. You have an amazing sky. The dock provides a leading line, leading you straight to the boat, which then leads you straight back to the little inlet, which then leads you up to the, you know, most visually interesting part of the sky. And the picture has great initial impact. But when we dig further into the image, we see a lot of potential that wasn't realized. Um, the image, particularly the Milky Way, the sky itself, could be punchier, more tonality and variation in that sky. And then as you look into the sky, you see that it's very, very noisy and has some pardon my lack of diction there, visible artifacts, particularly where the sky meets the horizon. There was judges are torn about the tree in the lower right corner, and there was some question as to whether we might be looking at a composite. The latter did not figure into the score. It was just something that came up in discussion. And there was a suggestion that maybe denoising earlier in the process might have helped with that sky. Next picture, please. Um, this one is a great pose and what I call a decisive moment, and I mean that in the pure Cartier-Bresson sense of that word. All of the elements in this photograph came into alignment. It was the moment when everything in the picture clicked. Great positioning of the two subjects, good crop with just a little bit more room in front for them to fly off into. As we're getting picky, the swans here are a little bit muddy, and there's some loss of detail underneath the wing on the leading bird. I'm sorry, the rear bird. If you see that kind of gray patch underneath the wing, as you get into it, there's not a whole lot of detail there. It's very smudgy. The eye of the lead bird might be a little bit more nicely defined, but great catch. I don't have one as good of these birds in my collection. And we're on to nature, David, so you're up.
Uh, Thanks for having us. My name's David. I've been taking pictures about as long as Jeff has, going back to a high school graduation present. My primary interests are nature, landscape, and people. I'm active in two Twin Cities clubs, and I currently have an exhibition on display at McAllister, which is entitled "A River Runs Through It: The Mississippi and the Urban Core."
Thank you for the intro.
Sure. All right, nature, sevens. Badlands. This is we really like the pose. It's not sort of a typical buffalo standing in the kind of the wide open space. We're trying to get a sense for whether this is a tight crop. There's a little bit soft in the resolution and the sharpening, and the greens felt a little vibrant. I would also say that the horizon line in the background would improve the picture if it was straightened a bit. There appears to be a little halo on the head, but very interesting subject and not the typical shot. This is a tough one to figure out how to actually kind of get the subject the way you want it. If kind of sharpening can make it a little crunchy, and that at least on the screen appears that way. Next image. Really strong portrait pose, very sharp, nice detail in the subject. The the bokeh in the background is a little swirly, which is a little bit of a challenge. And the background and the subject are so similar in color and tonality, it doesn't allow you, I think, as much as possible to appreciate the detail of the primary subject, which is obviously the animal. So, and then it might also benefit from a little lightening around the eye. There's not a catch light there, but just drawing that out, because kind of humans and animals and birds' eyes are pretty important in any kind of a portrait shot.
I'm sorry, and we don't necessarily have to go back, but I would also suggest that the maker take a look at the area around the lower jaw. They're masking. There's a blue halo
Yeah.
running along the lower jaw.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep. Okay, next. We like the strong portrait pose, and again, not the sort of the typical shot of an animal like this. There's action, so there's a story there. The snow feels a little overexposed, so if there was a way to dampen that down a bit, it would help the animal. I think most of the time we think that the brightest area in the image or the sharpest area is where the eye goes, and you don't want the snow to distract from the really nice focus on this particular animal. And so a little darkening in the background, maybe a little tighter crop would give you more appreciation for the subject. Next, chilling in the sun. We all like the teeth, and we like the fact that the remnants of the lunch are kind of visible in the teeth. That gives the story some action. And this is not a typical pose. Pretty good separation between the foreground and the background. The background's a little busy, and so possibly toning down the green or just darkening it slightly would help the primary subject pop out. There's not a way to take a lot of the background out because of the generally curving nature of the primary subject. So another example here of lightening the eye would also help draw your eye into where you actually really want it to settle, which is on the alligator in the first place. But in particular, we like the way the story was told with respect to the detail on kind of around the mouth and the teeth. Next. This is well exposed. The soft water is a good artistic choice. Trying to determine what the precise subject is, we thought it was the waterfall, but there's some nice elements around the edge of it as well. And the overall image is kind of busy. And so having a little bit tighter crop either on the waterfall or even cropping from the bottom and being able to pick up that nice reflection on the top, it felt to us like the two elements compete a little bit with each other. But otherwise it's an interesting set. We also talked about whether the ice on the left-hand side was additive or distracting. A little crop in from the left might have allowed for a better focus on that primary subject. Next. Really nice close-up, good separation from the background, good color contrast with the background, and that's come up in some other images as well. In this case, the maker was able to work it pretty well. It doesn't. It's sort of hard to zone in on the eye and with the monkey. That just may be the angle that you're kind of caught with, but the detail on the monkey and the detail on the branch are both attractive. The image seemed ever so slightly noisy, especially in the background. But the kind of the overall image and the separation from the background and the contrasting colors we thought were excellent additions. Next. Good eyes for both of the subjects and a really nice moment and pretty good separation from the background. This is another situation where the background and the primary subject are sufficiently similar in color that getting a little more separation, possibly by either desaturating the background or just darkening it slightly, would help then the primary subject pop off of the image more cleanly. And obviously it's hard to control, but the lack of eye contact with either of the subjects is, it kind of weakens the story a little bit there, but obviously you can't tell them to turn their heads toward your lens. So this is a nice kind of intimate moment for those two. Next. Crested Cara, classic bird portrait, nicely exposed, great separation, very sharp. It is another situation where you have a bird whose head feathers are dark enough that they kind of swallow the eye. So a little lightness on the eye, I think, would have been additive, and possibly a little darker in the background. The light green on the right competes a little with the bird itself, and a little, perhaps a little more detail in the white neck, just kind of drawing down the highlights and sharpening a little bit would help the subject pop out. But overall, really nice capture and nice exposure. Next. The exposure is dead on. It's a classic portrait pose. Great look at the eye. And the background is it's kind of sufficiently contrasty and different. So the balance of the feathers, both the whites not being too bright and the darks having enough detail, nice detail in the darks on the bird, nice contrast and nice sharpness. So a really very nice capture and good exposure. Next. This one is a great capture, and in particular, we've kind of now found one where the eye is really good. There's enough little bit of lightning in the catch light in the eye, which really helps. The background is appropriately blurred and kind of reasonably dark. You know, the light greens and the light skin or the light feathers on the bird are a little close to each other, but I think that the bokeh in the back helps keep the separation that you would want. The branch might have been darkened a little bit just to kind of better highlight the actual bird and subject, but it's a nice capture, and it's kind of an unusual tail feather, but including the whole thing in a way that's comfortable is a good addition to the image. Next. Truly vivid color, great eye. This is one where you have an advantage because you have a contrasting color in the eye, and it's captured well with a little bit of a catch light. The surrounding flowers offer some context. They're a little busy, but the overall capture and the inclusion of the plant that the duck is kind of coming to is additive to the story. And they could have considered even a little tighter crop, since the full bird is already not visible, then cropping in tighter would potentially give you more focus on the really good capture of the primary part of the subject without taking something out that you might have wanted, because it's that backside of the bird is already not there, and the head is really the subject here. Next. We were all kind of blown away by the hoverfly, just dead sharp. Fortunately, against a background where it allows it to pop, that the pink is sufficiently different from the yellows. The surrounding flowers offer context, so that then builds the story. The primary subject is off center, and the subject is pointing into the open space. So it may be that it's hovering, or it may be that it is getting up for a takeoff to the right to go to the next flower. It might have benefited from a little bit tighter crop, in part because it would have really, in a sense, exaggerated the quality of the primary subject. It would give that subject a little more visibility. But really nice. That was it may have been our high score for the set. Okay, next.
Moving on to pictorial.
Pictorial, right. And this one, there's good eye contact with the subjects. They both have open eyes. Looking here, the post-production felt like it rendered the subjects kind of a little different, or not really quite in line with the background. And we're not sure what the lightness on the right-hand side is. That may be a light peeking in, or it may have been an artifact of some of the processing. The two subjects are not quite as sharp as we might like, and then I just mentioned the brightness of the hair. But the fact that both subjects are looking in the right place and you can get a good look at the eyes helps the image. Next. Great colors and good exposure. Nice leading lines, taking your eye into the photo. We thought that it could have been improved by having a tighter crop. The boardwalk piece and the abundance of sky doesn't necessarily, we thought, add to the image, and the tighter crop allows you to get some of the busyness out of the sides and gives you a better focus on the subject, which is ultimately the family that's about to go under that little kind of curving entrance, and actually would allow you to also more easily be able to read the language on that sign, which is, I think, probably where the title comes from, the Welcome to Sharkies. But in thinking about an image that has kind of this many elements, I think it's always useful to try to think about which elements are crucial to telling the story. And so we actually talked about whether a crop from all four corners, tightening it down, taking out some of the sky and taking out some of the boardwalk, because you'd still have a portion of that leading line that would still give you what you need without devoting as much square footage as the image does here. But we really like the colors. Next image. Some similar comments here with the abundance of black sky. It's a good exposure of a tough scene. We'll just start with that. And the kind of getting the white balance right in an image like this with all of the different kind of colors and contrast and color casts is tricky. We thought it could have been stronger if it was tighter. The black sky sort of indicates this that it is at night, but taking out some of the top and really being able to focus on the really good capture of the detail in the image, both the buildings on the side and all the people in the middle would have added to it. And there seems to be a kind of a slight yellow cast, and that may be the lighting, but obviously with a little white balance tweaking, it may not have appeared that yellow in the field. And so playing with the white balance and cropping a bit would have made it a stronger image, but it's nicely centered and appropriately so. Next image. Really nice color palette here, and the combination of both the cool and the warm contrast. It fits with when the scene was taking place. Clearly, with all the leaves gone, it's more of a winter than a summer scene, and the mix of the kind of golden colors in the foreground, and then the more solid colors in the background. Really, they offset each other nicely. We did talk about kind of what the subject was. This just may have been intended by the maker to be just an environmental portrait, but we didn't find that our eye settled on any particular spot to kind of describe or tell the story, and that we understand that may have been intentional, but we oftentimes like to be able to be clear on kind of what we're honing in on and kind of what the takeaway is from the image. But overall, the color balance and the sharpness is nice. Next. Very sharp subjects and nice positioning. I mean, they're obviously both looking in the same direction, so it isn't kind of a confusing story as it would be if they were looking in different directions. The crane in the front has the advantage, as we've talked about before, of the eye having a nice contrast and color difference from the feathering, so that really popped out nicely. There's the background has decent separation, but it's a little busy. The bokeh helps kind of tone that down. And we also thought that it might have been a stronger composition if the crop from the left was in a little tighter, because that would accentuate the nice detail on both of the subjects, which are both in good focus, despite the fact that there's a little distance between the two of them. Next. This is a classic scene. It's well exposed. You got the right time of day. You know, the sun against the Tetons in the morning is spectacular. That we thought the challenge with a shot like this is that it's been taken by many photographers, and so finding an interesting composition for it is a challenge. Having the peaks appear above the barn so you take advantage of that morning light is terrific. We thought that the scrub in the front was a little bit of a distraction and pulling up the crop from the bottom so that you get a really good focus on the two primary subjects, which are essentially the barn and the mountains in the background would have just made an overall stronger image, but well captured and pretty good depth of field considering how far apart the barn and the mountains are. Presumably a pretty small aperture. Next. Really interesting capture. The pieces of it are good. With the moon and the sunset and the harvester and the crops, there's kind of several possible focal points. We thought that it could have been improved with just lifting the shadows a little bit in the foreground, which then might help tell the story of the farm machinery doing its thing, because the darkness makes it a little hard to tell what it is or where they are in the process. But the sunset is spectacular. The moon is about as good as it can be in a situation like this, um, and so just a little bit of difference in the overall exposure we thought could have made this a better story without actually causing the eye to go to a part of the image that would be distracting. Next. Out to pasture. Great subject, nicely exposed, a lot of good texture, pretty good lighting, so the detail really pops out nicely. It is there's a lot of ways to photograph vehicles, obviously. This one works reasonably well, but the front-on shot is pretty common, and we wondered if there was some kind of additional interest when looking at the way the bed of the pickup looks and whether there would be a way to create a little differentiation. And we also noted that because of the time of year and the nature of the rust, the colors ran together. So the background contrast may have taken a little away from it and not allowed the colors on the truck to stand out as well as it might. A little dodging and burning on the truck might also improve it. Next. The exposure is good. The image is busy. It has a nice variety of colors, but the foreground feels a little too busy, so your eye doesn't really get to grab anything that is prominent. In this case, fields of flowers tend to be like that. It's a tough shot, and this time of day. It looks like you're probably midday, and you have to take the shots when you can be there. But the rocks and the brush on the left are. The entire picture seems a little too sharp and vibrant, and so a little softness would help. But it's hard to know exactly kind of where the maker wanted the eye to settle. It may be the pink flowers in the foreground, but it sort of lacks, we thought, a sort of a grab, a particularly obvious subject. Next. Well-controlled exposure, a lot of really bold, kind of contrasty colors. Really nice. The background gives nice context. Another tough one on time of day. This looks like midday. And in terms of the composition, particularly would have preferred the rocks in the lower left corner not be there. It seems to take away from what is really a nice structure, kind of interesting, with some direct lines and some curvature with the dome, and so kind of moving the rocks and the little brick there on the left would have allowed you to, I think, enjoy the primary subject even more. But as we said, the subject and then the background between the midtones on the water and then in the far distant, a little bit brighter, which is picking up the sun, all gives it a nice depth from front to back. Next. There's an abstract quality here that is really terrific, clearly exposed for the sky, and it is in focus. Depth of field is pretty good. It as far as sort of possible improvements, it might benefit from ever so slightly lifting the shadows in the foreground to get a better sense for what it is. We thought it was probably a harvested field, but to find a way to give at least a little bit of a clue to provide the rest of the context for what the overall scene is. But great colors and nice mix of foreground, midground, background, and you could you got a good show from the clouds. Next, tangle rope, good exposure, really nice colors on the rope, nice sharp focus. The scene is all foreground, and the boats give context, but they're not particularly interesting in and of themselves. It might have been more dramatic if the angle was even lower. This looks like it was a little bit off the dock, and you could still have picked up the balance of the image from side to side, and help strengthen the focus on what is ultimately the primary subject, which is the rope. Next. The Last Resort. Interesting story, interesting subject, probably a good story. It looks like the resort is now gone. But it's a picture of a sign. And so that would kind of work well as a travelogue, but we didn't feel like there was enough visual interest in the tight crop. It might actually have looked better with a little wider view to understand what the resort actually was. Pictures of signs and pictures of other people's artwork can both be challenging. And so they are, and especially of signs, it's almost always about storytelling. So being able to help with what the story is with a wider frame would have, we thought, strengthened the image. Next. The exposure here is good at Victoria Falls. The falls, we thought, are really the main subject, and so the amount of foreground seemed to be given more real estate than might be preferable, so that the viewer can truly appreciate the spread of the falls, which is really the selling point for that particular location. The focal point is really in the foreground, which is not really the subject. The ferns are not the subject. So either with a tighter crop and or a kind of different focal point, we thought this could have been a stronger image of a fantastic location. Next. Really idyllic scene, nicely seen. We thought the shadows were a little too deep on the mountain, and we struggled a little bit with kind of thinking about what the overall subject was. Is it the mountains? Is it the small village? Is it the river? There's a lot going on in this shot. And it felt like there was a lot of potential between the contrasting colors and then some of the interesting visual elements, including the leading line of the river and the buildings. And so kind of a tighter look at the scene might have been offered a kind of a clearer sense of the subject and then of the story. So it's a little broad, a little kind of snapshotty, but obviously a beautiful place if you were standing there being able to try to capture it. Next.
I also want to add on this one. What I'm about to say, you may very well have made this photograph correctly, but it's one of those ones where you've got water and the water appears to be tilting downhill, and that may be all the way that it is in reality, but somehow I found it visually troubling in this particular scene. It's just one of those ones where you have to play around with what is straight and what isn't straight. And you may have done the best job you can. I'm not saying that I could have straightened it and made the photograph better. I'm just pointing out a sort of visual disconnect where I looked at, I'm like, that water river thing, stream thing doesn't look right to my eye. So thanks.
The other thing I would toss in, thanks, Jeff. The other thing I would toss in is, as I was talking about possible compositions here, it looks like if you look at the bottom of the image, it looks like a rock outcropping. So it seems to me that you don't have much opportunity to sort of change your angle of view without stepping over the cliff. So, right. So we always have to work with whatever's in front of us and with what the reality of the shooting location does for us. So, thanks. Next. Basilica of St. Mary, beautifully handled exposure. The highlight on the foreground object is nicely controlled, and that is obviously an artistic decision, and it is. We took that to be the primary subject of the photo, but we like the fact that the surrounding background gave you in a sense, a true context for the image. Another way that someone might shoot this would be to go even tighter in on that font. But then you would sort of lose the fact that it is in this spectacular, very large interior church space. And so moving a little closer would be good. The fact that it is dead center, I think helps it. And I also thought that putting the foreground font slightly off center helped you then to see the altar in the background. So that completes the description of the space. If the font had been dead center, it would have visually blocked the actual altar in the background. So this was a nice way to be able to organize the elements and the balance and the contrast works. This is these interior images or interior spaces are not always easy to capture between the potential light spaces and the dark. And in this case, the pillars in the background were lifted just enough so you can see what they are without distracting your eye from them as part of the composition. So very nicely done. Chloe. Really unusual pose, obviously, and great eye focus. Background's nicely blurred. There's a little more activity on the left-hand side than might be necessary to give context with some kind of lightness on what is apparently a stone, either a stone or a tree. It's possible that a vertical crop would have been another way to be able to get at this because the primary subject lends itself to a really, really high quality, sharp image, including the sharp eye focus, and having the little claw there, I think is also a nice addition to what could have otherwise been a more ordinary piece. And the background on the right is appropriately darkened and separated from the light color of the fur on the primary subject. So overall, a really nice capture.
I photograph Chloe every single time I go to Como. And I just want to say that if I'd walked away with this one on any given day, I would have called it a big win. This was a Really nice moment.
Okay, next up. Great story, great expressions. The interplay between the two, the interplay of their hands, uh, capturing the fact that they both at the same moment had an interesting facial expression was really nice. We and the background being somewhat darker is good. We thought that the individual on the right hand side was a little bit of a distraction, so a tighter crop might have been able to even pop out those really good qualities of the facial and hand expressions of the primary subjects. Um, and the background, especially the top half with the darker trees, would have been an ideal setup for creating that a kind of a tighter look at the two subjects and really enhance your look at each of their faces and their hands. Next. Layer upon layer upon layer. This is one that I think we found when we first pulled it up on the screen. Each of us took a few seconds to kind of walk through it to try to figure out what we had in front of us. And so that composition through that unusually shaped opening, kind of leading back into other elements in this particular architectural piece, was really well done. The one thing that we thought about was that the background, which is I think the wall that is immediately in front of you, is a little on the bright side, and the possibility of getting a lighter look at any subject by darkening the background can really be an effective way to cause then the primary subject to pop. Um, and so finding a way to kind of suppress or take down the highlights on the white wall in the front helps your eye to kind of leap through that and get into the detail in the background. And the detail in the background has a nice midground and a nice background, and you sort of feel like you could walk all the way through this to that last element that seems like it is kind of up under a roof there in the back. So nicely done. Next. Really nice vernacular on this one. Really interesting color contrast, unusual colors. Clearly, the equipment's got some miles on it. It is very sharply focused. A little debate among the judges with respect to the elements on the right, particularly the plastic glasses, and whether having the primary subject being dead center might have strengthened the focus on what is a really very clearly captured subject, captured well enough so that some of the kind of deterioration of the enamel or color coating at the bottom and up on the top really pops out. We found it very evocative and well captured.
There was a show, an exhibit at the MIA, I think about a year ago, Counterculture, which was all appliances, of a certain age on kitchen counters. And when I saw this picture, I was just very much brought to mind that exhibit. This was well seen and well executed.
Next. We thought this was a great capture. This reminded me of the flying insect back ways back, where the dead capture of the primary subject in very difficult conditions was terrific. It's a good blend of the sharp and the motion blur on the subjects. The composition nicely captures the full look at both birds, and we thought that the green in the plant um, also nicely complemented the birds. The 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 red element was a little hard to understand. It almost seemed like it might have been slightly overprocessed, but the strength of the image with the two primary subjects kind of catching them in the same focal plane and then having really good look at the eyes on both of them, we thought made this just a super strong image, and we really wanted to give this one a high mark. Okay, back to Jeff.
I guess it's back to me.
Yep.
So, topic 7.
I found a very restful calm to this photograph, and it is appropriate to the scene rendered, and it's a good subject for the topic. I thought the execution might be just a little bit too flat. I understand that we're going for that misty, peaceful calm, but it really is a very, very gray image. It does start to approach the white whites, but the only area that we see the black blacks is sort of a puddle in the lower right hand side of the image, or bare patch, whatever you want to call it, beneath that tree there. And that's not particularly an interesting element. It's not necessarily an area that we want to draw the eye. Um, Basically, because of that, it's very difficult for the eye to land. We also have, again, the horizon issue. I am not saying that your camera wasn't level. It probably was, but you always have to kind of balance the horizon of the actual rendered photograph, and this one just sort of tumbling off to the left. And then that first line of headstones, rather than inviting me into the picture, it's almost like a picket fence that's providing something of a barrier of entry into the rest of the photograph.
I would
Next.
I
Oh,
just
go.
would toss in one comment. When I first started looking at this one, and I like to do monochrome, I also thought that it might have been interesting to try to do some subject masks on some of the gravestones and make them a little darker to give them a little more contrast to the back, so they don't, like the big one, the big white one in the middle. Not to You wouldn't want to do this in a way that seemed unrealistic, but allow them to pop a little more, because the background will carry the misty look pretty much on its own.
Next. A lot of potential in this building. Um, what we felt is that as rendered, it's kind of bland, which may be deliberate, and we understand you're trying to go for that quiet, but there's so much amazing texture in that building, and it has just been flattened out by the lack of contrast in this picture. And because really and truly the entire picture is the building, that lack of contrast resulting in a lack of interest kind of damages the impact of the picture. A little bit more context might have helped. Somewhere you've got to find your story. I propose to you that there is something going on in there. If you look through that lower right-hand window and you see the window out behind it, there's a story through that window somewhere. And hopefully, while you were there, you got a little bit closer to the house and you captured that story. Again, you could definitely see this picture included in a travelogue or as part of a story about the area or something like that. It just doesn't quite have the strength necessary to be a competitive salon photograph. Next. This is Lamer Valley in the clouds. Another, the silence here is palpable, and the scene is definitely worth exploring. The diagonals in this scene work, just kind of running across the frame and providing the foreground, middle ground, background. Um, there's some detail in the shadows here, but overall, I feel like the snow is too dark and the overall scene is too dark to be interesting. All of the light is coming in as part of that lit mist, and none of the tangible objects in the photograph are really adequately lit. And, we always say that we're always drawn to the area. Some people say you're drawn to the brightest spot in a photograph. There is a group amongst you and the judges here that says that you're actually drawn to the point of highest contrast. I would argue the point of highest contrast is that sort of lone evergreen tree right there on the right-hand side, and the eye goes right there. And then from there, it really doesn't have very much else to travel. Beautiful shot. Wish I'd been standing there. Next. Ah, the pieces are here for a successful portrait. It's a good pose in the photograph. There's just enough of a rim light, and I'm saying it's a rim light. It may just be wrapped from your main light or your key light, but there is a delineation between the dark coat and the background just because of that little bit of highlight up there on the collar. That's really, really well done. So the separation between the subject and the background is there, even though dark subject, dark background. The key light is a little bit too hot on the face, which is a bit of a distraction. The fact that the leading hand is not in focus is a bit of a distraction, detracts from the picture a little bit. And the entire desk, newspaper, and hands could probably be dropped down somewhere between a half stop and a stop, maybe even a little more. Or you could come in with some sort of vignette because once again, you've provided a really, really bright spot, which is in counterpoint. The good news is the face is bright, but there's a strong counterpoint down on that desk, which really isn't the interesting part of the picture. When I had one other. Oh, I thought that overall the thing was a little bit soft. The overall focus of the image was slightly soft, at least as rendered in a JPEG that I was sent. That's not necessarily problematic for a portrait, and viewed right now here on my screen, I'm not bothered by it. But it is kind of a conflict with the sharp contrast that you've rendered this scene in. So just something to look at. And again, no points off for that. A little bit of softness in a portrait, your subject will love you for it. Next.
Jeff, I also like the fact that I've come to think that in portrait side lighting can be nice because it gives you a kind of a depth. If
Yeah.
shooting a face straight on with flat light doesn't give you any sense of depth, and being able to have this one with a bit of an angle and then some shadow on the side kind of helps accentuate the look of the individual.
Okay, next, please. The initial impact on this one was phenomenal. Every single one of us looked at it and went, "Ooh." And again, you'll hear this a lot in topic and in travel. We all wish we were standing there with you, especially since it was 11 o'clock at night on a very cold urban day when we got together to talk about these things. Or by the time we got to this point. And there's a nice capture and a good use of reflections in the lake. This is a picture that is as beautiful as the lake scene is. This picture really is all about that sky, and the sky itself needs more variation. You need to work the exposure and maybe a little bit of dodging and burning on the sky to really bring out those colors of the Milky Way, to really bring out variation, to keep it from just being it's hard perhaps for you to understand or to perceive that I would say to make it less flat, but there is a flatness to this sky despite the detail and depth that's in it. And if you just play with the tonalities in that sky, you'll really, really come up with something. It's also because of the visually noisy sky, it almost detracts from the notion of silence for me. And again, that's not something that we scored you down on because it is definitely a silent moment. It's just sort of when you think about entering things on topic, you can almost put in a perfect picture. And if it just strikes the judge the wrong way and the judge interprets the topic the wrong way, it could hurt you. Good shot. Next. That's morning fog. It is peaceful. It is quiet. My feeling on this one is that there's too much there to call this minimalist, and there's too little there to call it pictorial. The foreground really isn't doing anything to support either the tranquil nature that we're going for on topic or the visual nature of the scene. So this is one where I would crop, crop, crop. Um, we're also, this is a case where once you get to the bird actually isn't very sharp, isn't very sharp. Beautiful scene. Next. Where are we here? This is not a peep from the neighbors, right?
Right.
This is definitely a bucolic scene, and my only thought was that it's peaceful until the rooster that's bound to be down there starts crowing and the dogs start barking. But it's a really really nice scene. Um, Ideally, the farm is just a little too small, and at the end of the day, you kind of wander around this scene and you see that little village there, but it's or farm, the buildings, and it's not enough to grab and hold you. So you keep looking, and it just isn't quite enough to hold interest. There's also the hills themselves seemed very noisy, almost of a pointless nature. Next. Okay. Good exposure on the bird overall. We could talk about the feathers on the back and maybe knocking the highlights down, bring out some details, but it's not totally gone. You're in the neighborhood here. The water running off the beak is a wonderful detail. That really elevates the interest in this scene, and it's a sharp capture of the subject. Little more detail, a little more detail on the feathers in the back, and the eye is lost. There is a little bit of catchlight there if you look, so I would work to bring that out. Next. Love the moon in this. Nice capture of the dark sky. I think this is one that where a panoramic crop would work well for you. There's a lot of, despite the fact that there's clouds and a little bit of contrast in the sky, there's a lot of dead space in the top of this image, and there's a lot of dead space in the foreground of this image. Um, I also wonder if the strongest points of interest on in this photograph are the trees on the left. Despite the gazebo, the gate, the arch, and the Christmas tree in the center, the trees on the left really keep pulling me over there. So that moon and those trees on the left are a picture that if you have the opportunity to rephotograph this ever, that's a picture that I would investigate further. Next. Beautiful night for a walk. Once again, no one is disputing the silence, the tranquility of this scene. Good handling of disparate elements in a somewhat of what we think is an HDR or approaching an HDR exposure. Um, I feel that there's almost a little too much woods and not enough sky. And the subjects, I understand that you're kind of trying to set the subjects within the scene. And by the subjects in this case, I mean the two people taking the walk, but I think they are a little bit too far away. The path to them does provide a leading line. We get there, but it's a long trip. And when we get there, we really don't have a whole lot to see about the people. Um, and there's some visual conflict between the clear dark sky and how bright the snowbank to the right is and the roadway and so forth. So if it is an HDR, maybe taking it down a notch and allowing a little bit more of the night to soak into the surroundings would benefit the photograph.
Yeah, I think taking down the snow on the side, on the right-hand side would really make the sky pop.
Yeah. Next, please. So a quiet scene, but ultimately, unfortunately, it's a bit of a road to nowhere. We walk down this path, we get to the light, we've got trees on both sides. The most interesting and strongest visual element in the photograph, unless you're talking about the line of the light itself, is the tree on the far left border, which is brighter than everything else, has a ton of detail, looks like a really, really neat tree, but it's not enough to carry the amount of real estate that's in this photograph. Next. Okay. I think this photo is well seen, well intended, and well worth capturing. It had very, very good impact, visual impact for me initially, and I saw the cat in the grass right away. As we discussed it, it is a little bit too monochromatic to hold the interest. So it's kind of neat. Oh my goodness, there's a cat in the grass and it's going to get me. And when I say cat, I recognize that I'm looking at a big cat. So we know that there's a predator there, but there's just not quite enough contrast between the lion and the grass around it to hold visual interest. And there were viewers that did not see the lion right away, in which case the photograph for them had zero initial impact. And
That,
to
that would
be
be me.
okay, well, I wasn't picking on anyone in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. I had to go back to it a couple times before I figured it out.
Yeah. So, just something to be aware of that. And like it or not, whenever you are in competitive photography, a total lack of visual impact will work against you because you've got to have something, you've got to have initial impact to draw someone to look at the picture. And then you've got to have part two of that, which is that the picture has to be interesting enough to back up you got my attention. Now you have to earn my continued attention. Um, we did discuss the possibility of maybe just tightening the crop might be enough just to eliminate some of the background distraction. Also playing with contrast. It would be very, very hard to get a brush on just the cat in this, but if you are an absolute wizard with creating brushes, you could play with reducing the clarity of the background or the texture of the background and increasing it in the subject lion. You could play with contrast. There are things you could do to maybe bring it out, but I think your number one tool here would just do a tighter crop of this subject.
It,
I'm very jealous that you had the opportunity to make this photograph.
one other thing I would toss in, I was one of the ones that took a while to figure it out. It struck me once I figured out what this was, and there's not any easy way in Lightroom or Photoshop to kind of make some contrast. I got to thinking that if the lion was on this Zoom call, the lion would be saying, "You stupid humans, the idea is not to be seen." And that's why I chose that particular spot to lay down in the grass.
Yeah.
So
And again, I think that as part of your book on your trip to Africa, as part of a textbook about lions and their natural habitat, there's a lot of ways where this is a good, effective, and useful photograph. It's just when we talk about it in a competition against other photographs where we're starting to deliver some of this criticism. This is not a bad picture. I want to really, really emphasize that. This is good work and it's well captured and well seen. Um, this one did very much evoke that idea of silence. Either a previous time when we had less distraction, or a modern time, but unfortunately the snow took the power out, so we're going to have to read by candlelight tonight. So and any of us who've suffered that power failure know how quiet the house becomes immediately. So immediately I thought this is quiet. There is a silence to this scene. The exposure is well handled, particularly the candle. As someone that spent a lot of hours making a photograph for a candle lit theme for the Crosstown Camera Club a couple of years ago, I know what it takes to get the flame just right. So you are commended for a good exposure here. And the warm color cast in this case serves this scene well. This is lit by the candle, and therefore it should be a warmer light. Candle light is a warm light. Um, to sort of get into the what might make this better, if you put text in a photograph, someone will read it. So I guess I'm going to ask, are we really going to spend our quiet night reading a pattern of language? I'm sure you chose the book because it had a sort of oldie-timey cover and it looked nice. But if you're going to put text there and make it readable, people are going to read it. It might have been beneficial to render this in such a way that the text was a little bit less distinct, where you couldn't get in and read it. In other words, does the book's title serve your story?
Hey,
And if
Jeff,
it,
after you mentioned that when we were talking about this a few days ago, I was trying to think about what do you do about the the title and the side jacket, and my solution was flip the book open, flip it over 180 degrees, and just have the pages show up on that side.
yes, that's a possibility. Yeah.
So,
This book says sure. And then again, it's sort of I like the way that the background, plants, feathers, fluffy things. I like the way that they break up the monotony of the background and everything. But if you really start to think about it, I'm kind of asking myself what they're doing on the table. So, no points were taken away for that. That's not a point of deduction. It's just sort of one of those things that I struggle with myself when I create these little still life scenes. Is that uh, you want them to appear casual and natural, not contrived. And I just wonder, and someone's going to say, no, this was just the scene in my house, and I took it, and I believe you. But it just sort of, kind of took me out of the story of this a little bit. And if they were going to be there, then maybe it should be a book on flower arranging or a book on, But nice job. Um, yeah, nice job.
it's a
Next.
nice way. It's a nice way to add some color into what would have otherwise just been a candle and a red book,
Absolutely.
because the wall is just dark. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Tranquil water on the North Shore. Both are nicely, sky and water, both nicely rendered, and I like the overall color cast here. We've got a good mix of foreground, midground, and background, a well-balanced scene. I would like to see a touch more detail on the rocks, so maybe just lifting the shadows a little bit, or boosting everything that's land by 3/4 of a stop. Something just to bring out a little bit more detail in the rock. Other than that, nicely done. Next. Here's an example of the border treatment. We didn't call it out, but we had a couple of photographs earlier where part of the critique that didn't get said out loud was, is the border adding to the story, or are you just adding a border because, well, I've got this cool border tool? Here we think the border works really, really well. And the overall treatment, complementing the quiet mood. Um, I personally would love to see this just as a straight up monochrome without the sort of oldie timey tint, and I think it would still hold up. I think you still have a very strong picture. And that's really, really important because I am of the opinion that you never fix a photograph by putting a filter on it. If the photograph isn't a good photograph to start with, putting a filter on it does not work magic and make it a good photograph. It makes it a mediocre photograph with a filter. And this is not that. I think this photograph could be presented straight, and I think it would be every bit as powerful and evocative of mood. But the texture and treatment here are nicely done, and they complement the picture. They don't take away from it. So now we're getting super nitpicky. But if you really do stay in the picture, I start to see, my initial impression of this is that it's an old-timey picture, and it's supposed to be one. The dress on the subject sitting there might be a little modern, or might at least be mistaken for modern. Just something to be aware of. We didn't count down on it. I do find the white safety line on the pavement running out. And, I understand it was there. This is not something that you have control over. But that white line running back there also tends to put the picture of an era. And that's of an era when we had lawyers and lawsuits for I was not smart enough to stand back from the train track. So we already know that it's not 1944. It's, relatively modern era. So something to downplay that white line might really help because it's a contrast. It kind of stands in stark contrast to the wet plate look that I think that you were going for with this photograph. This is kind of the type of scene that often troubles me, and that's just a little bit that you've got a reasonably good story with the tracks on the left, you've got a great story with the building on the right, and you have a little bit of dead space in the middle. And of course, that white line is taking you right down through that dead space. So it might be one where you play with your angle and put field of view a little bit to strengthen the picture. But we liked it. We scored it. We scored it. We liked it, and good job. And we're on to travel. Okay. The scene here is amazing. I'm somewhat torn in this one. We had some where we said we felt the cool, warm contrast worked. This one I'm finding a little bit disconnecting. The fact that the foreground is all warm and the background is all cool. But in the end, it's not something that really caused us to count down. It's just to mark it down. That isn't what caused us to mark it down. It's just something that strikes me. I really, really wish this is another one that, boy, I wish I could have been there. Um, as as a picture goes, I feel like this might be just on the very edge of or bordering on overprocessed. I'm not saying it is overprocessed, but it's starting to get there. It's kind of got that HDR look and not the HDR look that I associate with photographs that make me relaxed and calm. It's very, very vibrant. It's very, very intense. May very well have been the maker's intent. But in this case, I think the majesty of this scene speaks for itself and it doesn't need an artificial boost. I strongly suspect that this photograph was made from a car that is 4 or 5 cars back from the locomotive, which means that what I'm about to say is probably an impossibility. But if the locomotive had been allowed to reach the peak of that curve before the photograph was taken, it would provide a better transition between the foreground and the background. It would be the stepping off point. Again, you can make the picture you can make. You probably weren't allowed to jump off the train and stand in the tracks to make a picture. So I respect what it took to make this photograph. Yeah, I just felt that there's a little bit of a dead zone, dead center in this picture. I would also argue for a little less foreground, but artist call on that one. Next. It's the Badlands. This is one of the this photograph is of a type that we see a lot because we photograph the Badlands a lot. At least two of the 3 people that sat in for the judging are regular photographers of the Badlands. And so it's a really, really nice scene, but it's got a decent sky. But at the end of the day, I don't really get a whole lot of story out of this image. The brightest spot is arguably the mound that is just in the middle ground there on the left-hand side. Or the patch of green just behind it. And then from there, the eye just sort of goes mountains, mountains, mountains. And I would also put this one at maybe bordering on the overprocessed. It just has a certain artificiality to it that does not put me in the restful mind of the Badlands. But again, if I would have been there, I would have had fun. This is a nice place. Next. Great expression on this, well captured. The eye is good, and the bird is well separated from the background. Where this image got hurt is that there are visual brush artifacts visible around the subject. And to me, the depth of the field on the bird doesn't make sense. The back is blurry in a way that I think the fall off is too rapid from the sharp parts of the bird that we're seeing. And there's no detail on the back either. So that's just kind of where that you just if you go into something with a sharpening brush or a contrast brush, you just have to really watch your edges. And if you go in and you don't have to go in super far. I'm not talking about a 200% zoom or anything, but if you do go in and look at this photograph, you're going to see around the borders of the bird are blurs that don't make sense from an optical point of view. Next, please. Here's another place that we all wish we could have joined you at. Love the colorful boats, love their contrast with the earth tones. I would ideally go for a little bit less cliff on the left, shift your field of view a little bit to the right, pick up those buildings, and then carry those boats further down into the scene. I'm getting lost in my notes here. Here we go. Sorry. The image is a little bit noisy, and this would be one where I would ask the maker to ask themselves, has the border I've added here contributed to the story I'm trying to tell, or was it just something that I added? Because I think that this picture works better with just a sharp, crisp white border, just like it came off of a print back in the 60s or 70s.
I would also say that the way that some of the villages in Italy choose earth tones for their exteriors suffers when you don't have some sunlight. Looks like it's an overcast shot, and so in some ways the buildings aren't that all that different from the rocky formations around them, and obviously you can't control what their color choices are, but they kind of run together. So this might be one of those rare photographs that actually having more direct sunlight might have actually been useful.
Next, please. Um, this is another scene where all of the elements are here. I think as a panel, we understood what you're trying to do, and we're rooting for you to succeed. Um, your time of day hurts you here, having your entire foreground in shadow and then having that bright background, but not quite bright enough that you're creating a true silhouette. It hurts you. And obviously, you're there when you're there. We don't all have the luxury to stake out all day and make our photographs, but as it's presented here, I think that this is also another one where we've got a lot of dead space in the center of the photograph until we get back to that gate, which is either middle ground or background, depending on how far back you want to go on the image. And I'm not sure, although I find them visually interesting, that wall with the little lit alcoves on the right-hand side. I'm sorry. That lit images on the right-hand side, the lit arches on the right-hand side, they just pull me away from the rest of the photograph. So they're an interesting element and they're worth exploring. But I think you have to explore that with a different picture, because I think your story here is I'm going to presume it's a young man, but the young person walking down the street in his athletic jacket. And we need to shift the focus over there and have a little less distraction around him. Next. Well, here's a place I have been many times, and I've stood in the very place where the photographer was. Um, and when you shoot Mickey's or any local icon, the Cherry Spoon Bridge, Split Rock Lighthouse. You kind of run into that same problem that we discussed with the Molten Cabin, which is you
Right.
are competing with every other photograph that's ever been taken of Mickey's, including every photograph that's in the judge's library, times three in this case. So what we've got here is a very, very credible shot of Mickey's. The exposure is nicely handled. There's actually some very interesting stuff going on inside the diner. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But we also have an attempt to make this nostalgic through the use of sepia. And I think that I don't think that the sepia necessarily adds to the picture in this case. And it's certainly when it's this yellow, to me, it just sort of takes me out of it entirely. Sepia needs to be a very, very subtle effect to be effective. And this is just too yellow for my eye. Um, And what I would encourage the maker to do is to look in the windows right above the words Mickey's on the front of the diner. And I think if you had gotten close and made some pictures through those windows, I think there's a story going on in there. So when you're doing pictures of icons like this, get your overall shot like this, but don't be afraid to go in and shoot the details. I will also say that if you happen to be a member of a camera club down in Florida or Arizona where you winter, enter the shot there because, you know, the same way flamingos do really well up here, Split Rock Lighthouse does great at Florida camera clubs because they've never seen it before. Nice shot. Next. I love a good storm, and I certainly miss living by the ocean. And I can smell the weather coming in here. There's an absolutely amazing sky in this photograph. And the frame in this case really gives you a little universe to live in. So it adds to the presentation of the photograph. Um, what I do have here is that the most interesting thing, the building is all the way on the right, and we've got a lot of relatively dead space on the left of this photograph. The breakwater is a little, or the gate, the fence, the wall, whatever that is off on the left there, a little bit too dark, doesn't really add a visual interest except for the break in the breakwater, which just provides this like little weird bright spot that I don't really know what to do with. I had to figure out what was going on there. Oh, I see. There's a wall there. And there's a break in the wall. So I think lightening that side or that gate a little bit, you are a little bit hurt by the lighting conditions here. And I think what you've got is a very streaky sun. It's coming in through a fairly heavy cloud layer, so it's going to be strong where it's going to be strong, and it's going to be not nowhere where it's nowhere. And you just got to do your best to take advantage of it when it's in a favorable position for you. I would also tend to say I'd knock the highlights down in the building just a little bit. There's nothing wrong with it being contrasty, but that brightness really is pulling the eye and locking it there. And there might be those that never even bother to explore far enough to see the break in the wall. Yep, next. There's a lot to love here. We've got four boats, four cabins, four reflections. Very, very serene. I love the float out there. It's well positioned in the scene. It's well positioned within the reflection of the tree that's being reflected there. So all of that is really, really nice. The horizon is well placed for this particular crop. This is a completely publishable photograph. I could see this in Outside Magazine, in National Geographic Travel Magazine. This is good stuff. The colors are crisp. The focus is good. Good balance top to bottom. I did ask that I am a big believer in on context. I'm a big believer that a scene can be a photograph, that it doesn't always have to have a strong and vivid subject. But here I do wonder how much of the surrounding hillside you need to create context. And I would look at alternative crops to better bring out and strengthen the position of your subjects within the frame. The green on the left side of the shore is maybe just a hint too vibrant. It can be toned down either with vibrance or by knocking a little bit of exposure out of the background, or maybe with a light vignette. And not something that's noticeably there, just that little hint. Um, and because of that extra green of brightness, it kind of pulls me up onto that hill, and that's not necessarily a place where my eye has to spend a lot of time. The picture here are the cabins, the boats, the float, and the reflection.
I would just offer one other thought. If you're interested in softening the trees, another way to do it would be just to drop the whole camera angle, take out the real trees, and let the water do the softening in the reflection.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was it, right?
Right?
I did see some questions pop up on the chat, and I don't want to speak for Terry or Steve, but if we have time and if those questions should be addressed, I'm happy to entertain them. I just that's what threw me for a loop that back there. Something popped up on the chat screen, and as I said, if you give me text, I'm going to read it. So I don't
So
know what your normal policy is.
I can answer some questions. Mary Ann is asking, who are the photographers for the accepted images? And Terry was going to do that. And
Yeah, I don't have that information.
right,
I can give you numbers.
right. Let's see. Evaluate at what percentages from Steve Cole. Steve, you want to talk about this? I don't entirely understand the question. You're still there. I don't see other questions.
Okay.
Um, this has been great to have a panel of judges. I haven't experienced that before. Lots of very helpful comments, and it was interesting to hear different comments from different judges, and so thought that was fabulous.
Thank you. Speaking only for myself, I think, but I think we all had a really, really good time doing this, and it's judging as a panel is a different experience because sometimes you have to let go of very deeply held feelings, and sometimes you're introduced to something that you just didn't see, and the other judges say, "No, no, look at this, look at this." So I think that it benefited the quality of the critique all around.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts from anyone else before we wrap it up? Gone. I'm going to stop sharing. And thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Nice work by everybody.